Hi everyone, I'm Bill Ayres, the chair of SERA, and welcome to our event on how can the government balance land demands for nature, food, climate and communities. Um, I think obviously there's been a lot of debate over the last year over kind of the balance of nature protection and environmental growth. I think some of the organisations on the platform have been quite vocal that you can balance both growth and nature protection. But I think actually I was going to say also SERA's position is it's not just about protection, but also nature recovery. And a recent report by the Green Finance Institute actually showed that nature is critical to our economic resilience. And their report showed that GDP shocks linked to the nature crisis could vary between 6 and 12% of GDP. So I think today, in terms of the debate, we really want to focus on that connection and the opportunities, but also link it to DEFRA's land use framework, which was obviously put out for consultation. But I think talking to all the speakers, we also want to kind of pull out a bit of the views about where that goes next as well, because that's going to be a pretty key driver of how we push forward land use change in the next 10 to 20 years. So I'm now going to start with Hilary and go down through the platform just to kind of do an intro, speak for sort of 3 to 5 minutes, and then we'll go to some questions and then over to the floor as well. But Hilary, obviously National Trust, you launched a very bold plan in January with a 250,000 hectare target for nature-rich land across the UK. So it'd be great to hear more about your perspective on how we achieve this transformation.
Right, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Lovely to be here. So clearly, it doesn't take a genius to figure out we live in an island. Land is finite. We have to make good decisions for the long term. And the Trust is a long-term thinker. We've been around 130 years. We own a lot of land. We own 250,000 hectares of land, and a lot of that is good for nature, but not all of it. But certainly in the development of our own strategy, which we launched in January, we are very, very clear in our head that the decline in nature is so catastrophic, so much in need of action from all of us, that something really very significant needs to happen and happen soon. So we have been clear from the outset that we really support the land use framework. It wouldn't matter who you speak to in terms of people who manage land. There is a frustration out there, and particularly in the farming community, that without a long-term plan, no one can do anything. Decisions can't be made. No one can think what is going to be the best use of our land going forward. What the framework does, I think, is very usefully, and with actually, I think, quite a lot of bold ambition, it makes space for nature. It does set out a plan for that. And it certainly puts us on the right track for our 30 by 30 ambition, which, feels very unachievable at the moment if you think of, we're in 2025. So the framework is really good. We embrace it, but it probably doesn't go far enough. First of all, it's only really largely confined to DEFRA. It isn't right across government, which it's going to need to be. It is a framework which doesn't really make it something that people will have to adhere to. And while, of course, we're in consultation at the moment and it's due to be launched, actually we do know that going forward it is going to need to be co-designed to get it into a shape where people feel as if they can contribute to it and that they feel incentivised to do that. And I'm thinking particularly, I guess, of the farming community who and manage so much of our land and who will be pivotal to making a change for nature. That, of course, then links to ELM, to SFI, to all of those things where we really have to make some firm decisions and stick to them to incentivise farmers in particular to make the right decisions. Obviously, that also applies, and some of the speakers today, to other uses of land that we're also going to need to attend to securing our energy into the future, to ensuring that water can be made clean and supply our communities that need it. And of course, very much a theme of this conference, build, baby, build, which I might have a bit of an issue with. However, we all recognise that we need building, but we need places where people can live and thrive. When we finished World War II, we were facing economic crisis, we were facing social disruption, we were facing all sorts of awful things. And yet then that Labour government had the vision to understand that people didn't just need boxes to live in, they needed places to be able to have access to green space. And in legislating for the national parks, they had a vision for the future, a long-term view of what would make the difference for people's lives, not just their functional need for a roof over their head. So the framework is good, but we need to make sure that our commitment to nature is true, and we need places where we understand that people's access to nature for their physical and mental health, their long-term actual equality agenda of having access to green space is delivered. And that's a lot to ask, but I think the framework has the potential to get us there if we stay committed to it.
Great, thanks, Hilary. Julia, over to you. I just wanted to give a bit of background. You obviously sit on the Parliament's Environmental Audit Select Committee, and you recently secured an inquiry into flood resilience in England. And I thought, actually, given the high profile of flooding, etc., kind of nature-based solutions would be another useful thing to talk about as part of the discussion on land use.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I just really want to follow on what Hilary is saying, talking about the value of that land use framework. And before we came up here, we were, speakers were saying, well, there's loads of initiatives. It's one thing after another, all these announcements. But frankly, that's what I think has been really positive in the last 6 to 12 months from our new government, is that this land use framework isn't just one document that sits on its own in a silo in one department and then put on a dusty shelf. It's actually one of a series of documents that we've been working on since we won the election. So you'll have seen that we obviously have been revising the National Planning Policy Framework. We've been working on the Nature Restoration Fund. We have launched the National Water Framework, which is actually a map of all the water assets around the country so that we can move away from talking about flooding over here and drought over there and drainage over here, but we start to talk about water management in the holistic sense, and we start to have that strategic plan about where our assets are and what is our plan to maintain them and to use them into the future. We've got the NESO 10-year energy plan, we've got the food security plan, strategic transport plan. These are not separate teams beavering away on their homework. These are teams sitting together, looking at how can we make sure that we are planning for the future for all the different types of community use for land. And I have to say, perhaps I'm naive, I don't know, I'm a new politician. I find it remarkable that a government could be in a situation where it doesn't have a 10-year plan. I mean, just think about the energy plan, right? They're asking the question, both nationally and regionally, where in the next 10 years are you going to have big energy users and where do we have big energy producers? And how do we get the energy produced to where it's going to be needed in 10 years' time, even if that's a housing estate or a new town? How could we not already have had such a plan? How could that not already be part of the day-to-day fabric of government and then going through devolution, how we operate locally? I'm amazed it wasn't. I'm delighted that it is. And my job is to reassure you, even as a backbencher, hold your ears, that doesn't agree with everything that we're doing. Even I think it's a pretty smart idea to get all our ducks in a row, get all our strategies joined up so that actually when we're devolving the power to councils and mayoral authorities, that actually it starts to make a logical sense. And in my own area in Shropshire, we don't have a combined authority, we just have our own local council. We're in the middle of redoing our local plan, and I have to tell you, it's been so useful to be doing it at exactly this moment when all of these new plans fit together and we can have that holistic approach to how we use land. And I'll just finish with that example about flooding. Have any of you visited Shrewsbury? Give me a wave if you've ever been to my beautiful town. Keep waving if you think it's really beautiful. Yeah. So even the Telegraph said it's the top 5 of towns in the country, and we consistently win that every year. Medieval, cobbled streets, the beautiful River Severn, the UK's favourite market. It's gorgeous. However, the River Severn is both a beautiful asset and a high threat. We used to flood maybe once every 10, 20 years. It's now 4 or 5 times a year and in multiple places. I have gorgeous little cafes that can't get insurance, and the last time they had a quote, it was £40,000 to insure them against flooding. That's not okay. So we've done a lot of work with the Environment Agency, with all the different partners about how do we protect Shrewsbury from flooding. We managed to secure £16 million through the River Severn partnership. It's a catchment approach, so it's all the stakeholders along the entire river. So not just Shrewsbury, obviously, all our neighbours up in Wales and all the way down to Bristol. So we got that money to do nature-based solutions up in Wales. If we have log traps that catch the silt in Wales, it doesn't silt up under my bridge in Shrewsbury, and the Sabrina boat can do its daily tour up and down the river. If we pay farmers the correct going rate and other landowners to use their land differently and flood out where it's appropriate and change crops and put deep rooting grass, we can absorb and hold water for longer so that we slow the flow of the river and we reduce the height at which it tips in my town. Here's a job for a politician, right? I have to go into the centre of Shrewsbury and tell my businesses that the 16 million quid is not going to be spent in Shrewsbury. Can you imagine how angry they are? Why are you spending it in Wales? Because if we spend it in Wales, we will protect Shrewsbury. And that is the catchment approach that we've done a huge amount of work through the River Severn Partnership, of which I am chair. And we're now trying to roll out that across all the other river catchments up and down the country.
Great, thanks a lot, Julia. And over to Jane Cooper, who's interim CEO of Renewables UK. Jane, obviously there's been, I think, fair to say, with the net zero becoming quite contested, there's also been quite a debate about onshore renewables. So I know you'll be talking about both in the context of land use, but it would be interesting to hear about the actual facts on the ground of delivering onshore renewables.
Onshore wind.
Yeah.
So thank you. And I'm really glad to hear, Hilary, your stories, and actually Julia as well, your flood story. It's really interesting to kind of get that holistic approach. Clearly we need renewables because of the climate change that's coming. We need clean energy, we need secure clean energy, but also having secure clean energy and mitigating climate change is actually also going to be a benefit to the challenges that you've just set out as well. The onshore ban was lifted at the start of this government last year. Within a week, there's an onshore task force which has now identified the challenges, what needs to be done, and actually getting that rolled out and getting moving with that. So I'm hoping that within the next year or so we'll start to see that kind of really start to take shape. We've already seen the first planning applications go in for onshore wind. I mean, I think we'll come on to some of the more detailed aspects around that. On the framework we spoke about, I was really struck, Hilary, with what you were saying there, is that I've just attended a ports panel, and we've ended up having a really similar conversation actually about the frameworks that are there, and actually different departments in government doing the lead departments doing their piece, which in that case is Department for Transport, but here it's actually DEFRA. And I think that challenge of working across different government departments and making sure that it's all lined up is really challenging, really difficult. I think with the recent sort of reshuffling of people, that's also going to bring additional challenges. So maybe we can speak a bit about that and how we can kind of work together, maybe to find sort of ways to work better together. I agree, 10-year plans. I mean, what a smart idea. However, we still don't have a 10-year plan. Okay, we've got the 2030 ambition, the net zero ambition. We're working really hard as an industry towards the offshore wind, onshore wind, solar, all of those to bring that forward. There's an auction round which is coming up soon. I think it's been slightly delayed, but that should be coming through early next year. So we're on that journey. But the strategic spatial plan, the regional spatial plan, the local plans, we haven't seen those. They all need to fit together. They need to fit together with the nature recovery, the marine recovery. We need to see consistency across that as an industry. Once you start putting different bits in places, it becomes really, really hard for the industry to work and kind of make sure that those consistent messages are happening. So I think that there's something around that, and I think how that fits together with what you need to see as well. But we're not there yet. We're pushing really hard to have that 10-year plan, and we've not seen it.
But you've been involved in the consultation with NISA around the REPs.
We've been in the consultation, we've been involved in that, but we still haven't got to the point of actually having that, which is where we're going to see some of that more additional information coming through, which is going to start providing that clarity. It's been quite, I'm not criticising, I'm just saying, it's just taking quite a long while. It's not straightforward. It's really hard. But you're right. We should have had it all along, and then we know where we're going to.
Great, thanks, Jane. And then next is Gavin Lane. You're the Deputy President of the Country Land and Business Association. It's a membership organisation for those with land, business and property across England and Wales. I think you have 26,000 members.
Yeah.
And but Gavin, you also grew up on a farm and run 2 farms, so you're also on the coalface of land use change and how you get it right. So really interesting to hear your perspective and those of your members.
Thank you very much. I mean, I would reiterate a lot of what's been said before, but in terms of my members and what they're actually concerned about, I mean, we've seen a huge amount of flux, I think, since the Labour government came in. We've seen the loss of BPS, the Basic Payment Scheme, which underwrote a lot of the support system for land-based businesses in this country. We've seen the halt to the Sustainable Farming Incentive, which was the flagstone of the Environmental Land Management Scheme. We've seen a change at the top of DEFRA with the ministers. We've also seen an environmental improvement plan consultation, a farming roadmap consultation, a farming profitability review consultation, and have I forgotten one? Yeah, and the land use framework as well. So you can forgive my members, I think, for feeling slightly confused about direction of travel. What they're looking for is stability and longevity. What they want to do is provide the solutions. They don't want to be seen to be part of the problem. I think they've demonstrated quite often in the past that they can produce the solutions that you want. There are no silver bullets. I mean, I don't think the land use framework is going to solve everything that everybody wants it to do, but I hope that it would be an enabler rather than a prescription, rather than a prescriber. I think it's got a lot that it can offer, but my members are ready for the fight. They're ready to provide what's needed in this ever-changing environment. And I mean, you know, we know what is happening with climate change. You know, as farmers, we've seen it this year. It's devastating. A lot of my members who've got very little grass have managed to, you know, they've managed to not have much silage or much hay available. Those arable farmers that have had to deal with one of the worst harvests for a lot of them for 15, 20 years. They know what climate change is doing. They want to provide the solutions for that, and they don't see it as being an either or, either food production or nature delivery. They think that there has to be done in balance because they understand that as an argument. So we're here to help. That's, I think, what I would try and say.
Great, thanks, Gavin. Julia, I was going to
Yes, it was the mention
start the discussion by
it was the mention
responding to Gavin's points.
Yeah, BPS had me twitching and wanted to reply. But I will just say that not only have farmers had the worst harvest this year because of the heat wave, but that's following 2 very wet years when their crops were also completely wiped out. So depending on what crops they were growing, they've either had 3 terrible years or at least 2 out of 3 have been written off. And I think that's really where we're getting into the profitability question. And even before we came to power, 12,000 farms have gone out of business in the last 10 years. And that's what has to change. So I think it's great that they're doing a review into profitability, and farmers should think that too. But I am going to ever so gently push back about the SFI scheme and the BPS, which is that we haven't completely removed BPS. What we've done is taken the entire budget of the basic payment scheme, so it's a subsidy to farmers to keep doing the same thing. We took the entire budget and we moved it across into the SFI, which is the Sustainable Farming Initiative, which is not a subsidy for doing the same. It's actually moving farmers and landowners into profitability by embracing sustainability. So it's don't keep doing the same thing in the face of climate change and making a loss. Don't expect the state to bail out a loss-making business. But look, how can we support you and help you to diversify, to invest to save effectively? If I give you some examples what that has paid for, it's paid for work around flooding and irrigation to make land more usable. It's paid for investment of slurry management systems. So, you know, trapping animal waste, helping it digest so that it can then be used instead of fertiliser. You know what's happened to the cost of fertiliser because of the war in Ukraine, but the increasing cost on farmers is pushing them out of business. Now think about the pollutant effects of that into our watercourse. So a one-off investment in the capital infrastructure of the slurry management system gives that farmer every single year less costs, more profitability and a better environmental outcome. So we have absolutely no qualms in taking money away from subsidy for doing the same and moving the wholesale budget into the Sustainable Farming Initiative to make it fit for the future, future-proof. So that's why we had to pause the scheme. The scheme was fully spent. We've had to pause it because we now need to upgrade and change that scheme. In a very boring side note, I spent 20 years working in government grant funding as a previous job. You cannot have a grant funding scheme that has no criteria and a zero failure rate. You cannot have it that the computer can close the scheme within 1 minute of opening it because it could all be spent on the same applicant. That's not a well-designed scheme. So we are improving that scheme. We've doubled its budget, and that's the reason it's been paused. The great news, of course, is we've opened the country stewardship scheme already, and I'm really hopeful that the relaunched, revamped SFI will be fit for purpose because we need to help farmers modernise. We need to take them on that journey.
I'm the largest advocate for SFI there is. I stood on a stage for about 4 years trying to get my members to take Sustainable Farming Incentive. The problem is that having taken all the money, it's now halted. So it's been a victim of its own success.
It's just paused until we've revamped it.
Yeah, to some degree. But it's what I think I was trying to get at was the fact that it would be great to see some stability. We were very used to a certain amount of stability within the Common Agricultural Policy. I'm sorry but that was the case. Any scheme going forward, it would be great if it was longer than just 3 years, that we saw a 10-year plan.
Agreed.
Yeah, I mean, maybe to kind of then move on to a question to the panel about going back to the land use framework, which is obviously seeking to be a strategic driver for the reform of land use. But I think the kind of central question is, did the government get the balance right in terms of the demands for nature, food, climate and communities? But then more broadly, the balance of, I think, Gavin, you're saying more it should be an enabling framework, not prescriptive. Is that the right balance, or do we need more clarity of targets? I know people like Green Alliance called for a land use task force to really drive change. And then there's the linked theme, which I think Julia and Gavin, you're already talking about, is how do you make sure the land use framework links to other incentives to drive change effectively? So it'd be interesting, probably go to you, Hilary, for a perspective from your...
Yeah, so I'm definitely in the place of, I think there does need to be a task force now to move it on to something that is maybe not prescriptive, because actually, as I said in my opening remarks, I think it does need to be co-designed. I agree with you wholeheartedly that the new SFI needs to really help farmers to move on. I don't think anyone's looking back. You need to move forward. But to be fair to them, I think they'd be up for that if they had a sense of confidence that you're going to stick with the plan. Yeah. So I do think there needs to be a task force. I do think we need to consider all of the things. And I actually think the framework did a fairly good, albeit top level, go at all of the different uses of land that we are likely to need into the future. But if you take that as a starting point and then engage people in the design of what would that look like in practice, what are the targets and how do we achieve them, frankly, if we don't do that, we are going to stay in planning mode for another 3, 4, 5 years, and we're going to be at 2030 and we will not have got anywhere close to the ambition there. We're sitting at 6% of land for nature in the UK at the moment, and we're meant to get to 30% in 5 years' time. If we don't move on that land use framework sooner rather than later, and in particular working with the farming community to get there, we're not going to achieve that legal target that the government has set itself.
Great, thanks, Hilary. Jane, I was going to ask you more, obviously not just onshore wind, but also solar. There's been some controversy among different political parties about whether that's the right kind of land use. I think Gavin may also have a view of like how farmers can stack the different benefits of things like solar on farms. So I'd be interested in what you see the opportunities are given the land use framework around renewables and how they can how they can be most rolled out effectively with the buy-in of communities as well.
Okay, so just for the avoidance of doubt, Renewable UK doesn't cover solar.
Right, okay.
So
Okay.
there is my colleague from Solar UK in the audience. I don't know if that's allowed actually to pass the. It's not
Pass the
allowed.
baton.
Definitely not allowed.
No, that's okay. I mean, so I just wanted to be clear about that.
Yeah.
I think, really what you're asking is about actually building renewable projects onshore,
Sure,
on
yeah,
land,
yeah.
and actually how you benefit the communities around them.
Yeah.
And I think that, the onshore wind side has actually, there's been many of them contribute towards the community benefit funds. And actually some of my briefing pack is the stats, which I can give you. But we benefit the communities a lot. We benefit the sports centres, the scout huts, all of those different areas. And actually I know that there's also a consultation going on with DESNES about actually mandating that, which is a shame because actually I think those are being brought forward anyway. And the solar also does the same. You also benefit those communities. I think if that's the question, is that the question you're asking me?
Yeah, but also the question is about the kind of the way some of these changes have been positioned is pressure on land use and the backlash from communities. So I was wondering how, I think the framing of this discussion is like we need to drive change to 2030, but beyond, how do we bring people through that transformation? Because it's not just farmers, it's communities.
No, it's communities, and it's about the transmission grid as well. I would see it as being about the transmission grid and the distribution grid. I don't think it's easy for communities. I think it's hard. I think it can become very personal. I mean, my experience is, I used to work at Orange, so I worked for a mobile phone company, went through quite a lot of challenges with building out the mobile phone network. And actually, when you make advances in technology, when you're bringing forward something new, which is actually, it's kind of like the next industrial revolution, there are going to be really difficult moments. And I think that this is one of the bits, some of it will be about benefiting the community. Some of it is about doing the most sympathetic way forward. And if you think about undergrounding some of the cables and routes like that, that will be more expensive. And actually, it's not always the best for the environment. It's not always actually the best for the local environment, for the soil, for the habitat there. So I think it has to be done sensitively. But these are large-scale projects, and they're being brought forward. I think if we don't bring them forward, actually you've got the impacts of climate change, which is coming to the farmers and to the flooding and everything else. So I think polling that we've done consistently shows that people support the projects, they support the work. I think it becomes very difficult when it becomes much more local and much more personal.
Great.
And we are working, and actually part of that is that we will talk to the local areas as well about the best way of doing it. And that's exactly the same for all large infrastructure projects.
Great, thanks, Jane. Probably going back, Hilary, to you then on you talked earlier about the kind of obviously housing and getting the development right in terms of obviously the government's got the objective of 1.5 million houses over the next 5 years. How do you think they get the balance right between building a lot more homes but also protecting and enhancing nature?
So the first thing is that we're really clear that we do need to build more homes. That no one is arguing with that. But what we were equally clear on is start with the brownfield, which everybody agrees with. Yeah, except that there are already permissions out there for 1.5 million houses. So could we please just build those first? I appreciate you need to develop a pipeline, but let's get on with those, because there is something about staying in planning mode. Actually, the public need confidence that we do mean what we say. So get on with building those. Only then look to greyfield sites where, and we know from research that actually the public are broadly accepting of greyfield sites, but very, very, very protective of greenbelt. And so from a future planning point of view, actually being able to demonstrate that the thing that people really, really care about, access to green space, access to nature, all of those things, that we are, throughout this being respectful of it. And then it clearly is possible to do both. There are plenty of case studies around the country where Governments have been able to build homes and accommodate green space. Milton Keynes might be everybody's cup of tea, but broadly speaking, as a concept, it has worked. And actually, most importantly, it's been underpinned by a financial model that's allowing it to be maintained and supported. So, and that's not the only example. We in the trust ourselves, we're at about just over, in fact, 50% of our own energy is being created through renewable sources. We are also developers across the country for many, but we're able to integrate new energy sources into our development, also ensuring clearly access there. So we're only a microcosm of what is possible, but it is possible. So in terms of the framework, start with what you've got, make the best use of that, build out from there, but co-design and make sure that you're working with local communities and look to where case studies are working, and actually not just in this country, and there's many other countries who are doing this incredibly well. But the balance between green space and built environment is entirely possible. My final point, in case this is the last time I get to speak, is, and can we please stop talking about builders and blockers? It is clear that a tiny percentage of development has been slowed down or stopped by nature in its broadest sense, and it is really, really unhelpful to keep reiterating that at all levels of government, not least because the public and nature are getting more and more disconnected. More kids will recognise McDonald's sign than they will understand a carrot or where it came from. That is a problem, and if you then keep reiterating that nature is bad, it's bad in the broadest sense. So please, 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 that's my big ask, stop referring to nature as a problem. Thank you.
Phil, can I just make a comment to add on that? Because I think the other piece is we also need to look at when you're building those housing and looking at that is also it's about the energy infrastructure that needs to come with that, because at the moment we have some real challenges with the grid, and actually that comes back to the point I was just making earlier about building the grid. In order to be able to build the housing, it's not all just about onshore wind or solar. It's actually we need that grid infrastructure because it's just got very old due to underinvestment over a long period of time, because it's a really hard problem to solve. It needs money, but we also need to make sure that the planning, the infrastructure, the energy, all of that needs to come together, because we can't build a load of houses somewhere with that challenge without having the energy to go to it. And when you do that in the round, that's how we start to sort of think about how we bring the bills down, how we make the whole piece integrated. And it is a real challenge. And the task force idea, that's exactly what we need to be doing, is actually how do you bring that forward with a really clear remit and objectives, outcomes, all those other words that begin with O, that we kind of, where you're starting to bring together people who don't work together so often. This panel is great because we're kind of coming here where, you need to find those other areas, because otherwise we're not going to get there together.
Great, thanks, Jane. Gavin?
Yeah, I mean, I think partly on the renewables, but partly on a lot of what we're talking about, I'd like to see more innovative ownership models for municipal heating, municipal electricity. There's no reason why we can't look to Europe and see what they've done with, say, wind power, where quite often the village owns a turbine. They'll put up 3 or 4 turbines, and one of those turbines will actually be owned by the village. I mean, I think that's how you get people on board, is you effectively give them ownership in what they're doing to some degree. And I think some of our members would definitely look at that possibility if that model existed. I'd also make the case that, it goes without saying, but multifunctional land use, I mean, this comes down the whole time. There's no reason why you can't have solar panels with food production now. Yeah. You can't, you obviously can have wind production with food production, with nature delivery, all of that. We have to be much more sophisticated about how we look at land use. It's not either or one or, it's not, you don't have to have these very polarized arguments. You can do a range of things on one piece of land, and people tend to sort of forget about that sometimes.
Yeah, thanks, Gavin. That's a really important point, because as we look, I suppose, to the challenge you raised about farmers building more resilient livelihoods, the stacking of different benefits that comes from having solar, from having different kind of businesses and farming, all makes the business stronger.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, great, thank you. Julia, I was going to come to you, kind of building off Hilary's theme on how the government has sometimes perhaps arguably got it wrong in the way it's talked about nature. Obviously, one of the flashpoints for this has been the Planning and Infrastructure Bill, and you talked about the Nature Recovery Fund. So it'd be interesting to hear your perspective on the opportunity to get this right and drive nature recovery and the infrastructure we need.
So the Environment Audit Committee did quite a big inquiry on housing and housing growth and sustainability, and we, hauled the ministers, all of them, over the coals, asking them, how can you reassure us on biodiversity net gain? How can you reassure us that this is going to be taken seriously? And the answer basically is that they are trying to do this at scale. Now, they don't just mean the house building at scale, they mean the nature recovery at scale. And so their point is that they want it to be this sort of global approach, so portfolio approach, that at the end of a housing development, the effect on nature, both recovery and nurture, if you like, has to be more than before they started. But it doesn't have to be in exactly the same place that it was when they started. And that's a different way of doing things, and not everybody enjoys that, and I'm sure I'm going to get some pushback in a minute. But their point was that this is the way that we can scale up nature protection by being more flexible. And actually, coming back to your point about the existing sites that haven't been built out, there's a reason that they've not been built out. And I'm not going to say that it's blockers and newts, that's not what I mean. Generally, I think we could all accept the reason that brownfield sites slow down is because they cost too much, because it's the cost of remediation, the cost of depolluting, of land contamination, and then the risk at the end of all of that. And whilst they're doing all of that, inflationary costs on all those products have gone through the roof, and so the sites are no longer viable. So we might have 1.5 million homes on paper in terms of original plans. How many of those are still financially viable now is a different question that needs answering. And we shouldn't wait to unpick each of those before we build both houses and nature recovery at scale. So after lots of robust exchange on our committee, we came away with that reassurance that the total nature recovery and protection will be significantly higher. It just won't necessarily be in the same place that you started with it. And I think given what we need to do and the pace that we need to do it, that isn't necessarily a bad idea.
Thanks, Julia. Hilary.
So I agree with that. We're broadly in support of the landscape recovery. I agree with that. I think I'm going to challenge back a little bit on the 1.5. We do know that a large part of the blockers are also actually the developers themselves who are holding on to that land. So somehow or other to incentivise them to get on would be a good start. And then just in terms of, it being in a different place, also understand that to achieve the scale, habitat regulation is still key. So there is reassurance that there is the funding to support Natural England to ensure that scheme can actually happen. And I know there's lots of rumours around that is under threat. I don't know how true that is, but there's definitely a lot of concern around it. And also, ultimately, habitat regulations are there for a reason, and deregulation, let's face it, in the water industry hasn't gone brilliantly. So it's incredibly important to hold on to the bits of regulation that are really, really key and I'm broadly supportive of the scheme as is.
So I'm going to push back before I'm told otherwise. So that question was asked multiple times by some quite ferocious committee members, and the developers will pay the fee, which will employ additional staff at Natural England. They will develop habitat strategic plans for regions and local authority areas. And the contention that kept going round around the circle is it won't be a site-specific plan. It will be, so instead of, for this development, I want to commission a habitat protection order for this, which people were getting cross about, they were saying, no, that's exactly what we don't want. We want to understand where the habitat is across the piece, because it might cut across multiple sites, and we need to understand that habitat. And actually, that report shouldn't change site by site. That's the habitat, and your site fits under that within a strategic framework. The developers will pay, that's for sure. Now, I'm going to be really cheeky now. So, developers do hold on to land. Sometimes it's not viable and they don't want to go ahead. Sometimes you're quite right, they just want to land bank, right? And we could go even cheekier and say maybe some supermarket chains do that to each other. And they do that because what happens if they hold on to land? What happens to the value of the land? It goes up, right? They are blocking and controlling the land market. What has Labour done? Labour has unlocked the land market. We are saying that we are going to build 12 new towns, and they're not going to be on brownfield sites. Some will and some won't. We have reclassified some green belt as grey belt, where it's truly grey. What has that done to the availability and the price of land? It has changed it. We have interfered in the market. So no longer can a developer, a land bank, to control the price in their favour and slow down the development that we need. Yes, it has to be in the right place, but we are now intervening so that exactly that, we can unblock it and we can play a role, just as we should if we want to get this job done.
Great. Well, you heard it here, so we'll hold you to it.
I have no position of authority whatsoever. It is my personal opinion.
Well, I think with land use, when you hear it initially, you can think this is a slightly kind of dry topic. But I think what the panel is bringing alive is very much the opposite of that. It's absolutely critical to building a more sustainable Britain. And I think on that thing, Gavin, I was just going to ask you about regenerative farming, because when you look at the land use framework, obviously farming is still going to play a massive role in terms of driving nature recovery and food production. But obviously there's also a shift to trying to get more regenerative farming. So I'd be interested in your perspective and those of your members about the opportunity of regen.
Well, I think we were very disappointed in the land use framework data and evidence that the regenerative farming that had already been accomplished wasn't picked up in that data, and which made me really nervous about how good that data set is from the land use framework, because our members had done a vast amount. We know that there's 850,000 hectares of land that's now insecticide free through an option called IBM3 within the Sustainable Farming Incentive. None of those sorts of changes were picked up on in the land use framework. So I think regenerative farming offers a lot of what can be achieved in terms of multifunctional land use, where you have farming which is less intensive, and maybe you're able to combine that and stack that with nature delivery and nature recovery in there as well. I think it offers a lot of what could be good about the land use framework, but again, I'm just wary of silver bullets. Regenerative farming has its place, but it can't be seen as being the answer to all nature recovery in this country, because there will have to be areas that will need to be not farmed at all.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Gavin. I'm now going to open it up to the floor for questions, comments. I'm going to take a sort of 3-4 questions in a bunch, and then panel members can pick the topics they want to speak about. So if I can go to the woman here, thanks.
To do something in the inner cities, not necessarily in rural areas, about nature. And they want to do something creative. And we're also very interested in further education and where children can go after they finish school. And I'd like the panel to tell me what you think can be done to encourage schools and colleges to work more closely together, so that there's a pipeline of skills coming from primary schools right up to 16 plus retraining for adults. Because my experience over the last 15 years of working with FE in particular is that there's no strategy for that, and that children don't know where to go, that the careers advice isn't there, and that the colleges themselves are not on top of things like regenerative farming.
Great, thank you. Sort of person there, yeah, hi.
Thanks, panel, for a really interesting discussion. So I'm Sam Magor. I work for Humane World for Animals. I just wanted to bring animal agriculture into the conversation. So we know that over 70% of farmed land in the UK right now is used for animal-based agriculture. This is a pretty inefficient way of producing our food. It's also contributing to water pollution, air pollution, and also there are significant animal welfare concerns, particularly to do with intensive farming. So I was hoping to get panellist reflections on whether you believe that we should be minimising animal agriculture in order to make space for other really important land uses, so recovery for nature, communities, onshore renewables and things like that.
Great, thank you. Yeah, the person over there, thanks.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, Roger Mortlock from CPRA, the Countryside Charity. Tempted as I am to launch into a debate about brownfield economics and move beyond the playbook of the developers, but I wanted to ask instead a question about land use strategy. So we've been campaigning for something like the land use framework for about 20 years. So it's great to see it coming on, but it sits alongside, as I think Jane mentioned, a number of other spatial strategies, not least the spatial strategy for energy. We are seeing strategic authorities, when they're created, having their own spatial plans. So if they were all babushka dolls, if they were all Russian dolls, who is the babushka? Who does she report to? And what should be in her annual report if she's holding that across government?
Thank you. And yeah, the person at the back.
Holly Purdy, Nature Friendly Farming Network. I wanted to pull it a little bit about some of the facts on the farming side. I support with a lot of what Gavin has said today, but in particular, I want to really stress the urgency, which I don't think is currently being answered. Is we know farmers can deliver these solutions for nature, for food, for communities, but there's currently over 5,000 countryside stewardships expiring, and SFI is closed, and this is creating a very, very urgent and real risk for nature. You know, what is going to happen in this gap? Because even once SFI opens, there's going to be at least a 6-month lag before there are agreements. We're looking at over 12 months of payment gaps. And this is a payment for environmental and public good. This is not a subsidy. And I think it's really important that there's answers to this solution in the short term.
Great, thanks. Maybe Gavin and Julia, do you want to pick up on those points? Last question.
Yeah, I mean, it's an unfortunate position that we're in. I've got a countryside stewardship application that finishes 31st of December 2025. As it stands at the moment, with no scheme to go into, those overwinter stubbles and 2-year legume fallows that I've got on my farm will be ploughed up. I mean, that's the economics of the situation I'm in, which is unfortunate, but I have no other scheme to go into at present. I'm just urging the Secretary of State to come up with an answer, either to manage expectation and say that SFI is going to come on stream by April, summer of next year, or that they're going to have some interim payment to stop people doing the perverse consequences of coming out of the scheme. So I'm fully with you, on board with that. I think it's just an unfortunate position that we find ourselves in with a halted scheme and with people coming out of an existing scheme. So I hope it can be sorted out.
Great, thanks. Julia?
Yeah, so just to be clear, the country stewardship scheme has reopened and it's gone to those that were in the pipeline. So the existing ones in the pipeline have now received their next paperwork. So if you're a new applicant, that won't come to you, but those that were already, you're shaking my head. Yes.
1,500 applications of higher tier HLS.
Yeah.
I think invite only. These are mid-tier agreements. Some of these agreements are 30 years old, been rolled over for 30 years.
Okay.
And they have potential to stop them with nothing to go.
So those are obviously seen as like a quick win if they've been doing it year on year, that they're easy to roll out to get this gap filled. The relaunch of the SFI is what we've been doing a lot of work on. So I formed a group of other Labour rural MPs, and we call it the Labour Rural Research Group. So there's 50 of us who represent rural areas who've spent our time lobbying DEFRA and other departments to explain that the impact this is having on our food production and our farmers and land use. And our key message has been around not just the gap, but the seasonality. So their pushback to us is that if they relaunch the scheme now exactly as it was, within the first hour it is spent, and it can be spent by one applicant. So that is a false economy. It needs to be right, but our message to them is, just as Gavin has pointed out, the timing of it, once you've built in the time lag, also has seasonality impacts. And so there's no point introducing a scheme that by the time it comes through, it's too late to impact the planting or the drilling, depending on the type of scheme that is in place. So that's where we have been pushing on the need, what you would call urgency, because of the impact it's having in the cycle of the year. It's the only area we can push, because they are absolutely clear. If it is not revised or reformed, I don't want to say it's a waste of time, but it will not deliver what you need it to deliver, especially having increased the budget within it. One applicant could spend the entire budget in the first hour. That's 4.9 billion, and the computer would just automatically close. That's how the scheme was created. That is the scheme that we inherited. So I agree with them, they need to reform it. I've been telling them they need to reform it, and our message to them is to be really mindful about the timing of that. I'm hopeful that you see the new Secretary of State that we've now put in DEFRA is much more, is engaging much more positively with farmers. And we had the NFU meeting this morning, and Emma Reynolds was there with Tom Bradshaw, both of them saying how much more positive the interactive and the dialogue has been, and how they really feel that that relationship has had a reset. So we're hopeful that those messages are landing clearer and that we are feeding it through. So it's not that we're not aware of this, but we're fighting between getting better at what we do and making sure the timing doesn't hurt the people that we're trying to help. But I do want to come back as well on the question about the skills. So it's a bit different because I don't represent an urban area. Shrewsbury is a kind of a very large town in a rural setting. But we've got an agri-tech university up at Harper Adams. They're world leading in agri-tech. So they really are pushing forward cutting edge technology in agriculture and horticulture. So there are pathways for people who want to take this to a really high level. The gaps that we find and that our local employers and supply chain are telling us is in the lower skills, the apprenticeships and the key stage 4. And what we had was a visit from the Horticultural Trades Association telling us that we need to support colleges in offering more of those horticultural apprenticeships. So rather boringly, another thing that we've inherited is the problem in skills and colleges. So we've set up more techs and we've put more funding into Skills England, which is meant to bring together the employers and the colleges and the schools to make sure the pathways are there. So again, it's not that it's unnoticed, it's just that we've got quite a lot of things to tidy up, you know? We're trying to do quite a lot of things at once, which is why you're all saying it's very noisy with lots of initiatives. We have a huge amount to sort out, but that is very much, it's on Jackie Smith's radar in terms of the skills piece.
Great, thank you. Hilary, I was going to ask you the question about animal-based agriculture, and you have kind of around 5 million members. So how do you see that playing into land use?
Yeah, so the National Trust is really clear we don't tell people what to eat.
Yeah.
But what we are really clear about is that in order to restore nature, we are going to need to find new ways to manage our land. Hence why we like this, the land use framework, because it does actually, as I've said earlier, it sets out a vision for land that is prioritised to nature. In terms of land and how you deal with animal farming, broadly speaking, we are trying to encourage less intensive grazing, certainly in our uplands, which is marginal at the best of times and better for nature if it's managed less intensively. But I think there is something about actual education, back to your point earlier, about really engaging people again with nature, which is why I was saying please stop putting it up as being a problem. This disconnect is really fundamental, particularly amongst young people. And I know the Trust, particularly over the last sort of 3 to 5 years, have focused a lot of our energy in working in towns and cities with young people. It's where our greatest growth in membership is, interestingly. Young people really starting to engage with why nature matters. I think COVID made a big shift in that direction. But fundamentally, it's not necessarily core to my charitable purpose, but bringing nature back to life in the curriculum, to the days when you had a nature table in your class, even just the basic principles of that, getting kids involved in growing food and understanding where food comes from, why it matters to eat more vegetables, why all of those things, these all tie up, don't they? And to your skills point and so on and so forth. So while we can manage our land more sustainably with less intensive grazing, ultimately, this is a long burn in terms of getting people to really understand why their actions matter, and particularly with young people to really support that.
Great, thanks. And I think we've got the babushka question.
Oh, yeah.
Anybody want to grab the babushka question?
I'd like to.
Yeah, Jane.
Actually, and I'm going to dismantle the babushka because actually I think that's the wrong analogy. But I do think that there's a number of little dolls that are all the same size. Maybe it's like that army. What's the army called? You know, the
Terracotta.
yeah, that's it. I mean, there's thousands of those, right? But maybe there are thousands of these things we're putting together. I think that we need to move together. The reason I'm going to dismantle your babushka because I don't think there is that overarching. It is about the it's about climate change, it's about land use, it's about the environment, it's about housing, it's about all these different things that are all equally important. Because actually, if we get one and we don't have the others, actually, I think we've failed. So I think we need to find a way that we move together, which kind of goes back to that task group approach. And it's going to be really tough. I think we have to be really clear about the outcomes we're getting, and then we're going to have to make some really difficult decisions in order to get to the outcomes. And we need to kind of, I know we all keep on talking about delivery mode, but we've really got to get on with delivering this because we're getting to the point where it's I don't think we're too late yet, but we're getting to the point where we're getting too late. And I think people, there feels to me, speaking to different people, here and, from my personal life as well, is I think people just really want to see some changes and see some action. So I think we have to move into that mode. And I think we're just going to have to, make hard decisions, but we're going to have to make them together. They're going to have to be balanced.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to squeeze in two very quick-fire questions. So, person at the back and the person at the front.
Hi, thank you. It's been a great discussion. I'm Ian Mace. I'm from Associated British Foods. We've got quite rightly targets for environment, for climate, nature, water, etc. We don't have a target for food production. We have plans for the environment, for climate, and so on. We don't have a plan for food production in terms of keeping our population fed. Should we have a target, and then should we have a plan to deliver it?
Great, thank you. And then the final question at the front. Thanks, Christian.
Hi, Jackie from CPRE. CPRE has a rooftop solar campaign because it very much wants to support the clean energy transition, but there's a huge amount of space wasted on our rooftops, car parks and brownfield sites. When will the government get real on that and introduce the new Future Home Standard? And added question, we think mega solar is damaging. It puts communities off the clean power agenda, which is just difficult. So at what point does value have a landscape, and is there a scale at which solar is too big?
Great, thank you. So just to the panel, I'll go to you, Hilary, for a kind of quick wrap up and any answers to those questions.
Fascinating conversation, actually, and lots of interest in the room. On the should there be targets, I'm probably in the camp of saying no, there shouldn't be targets in this. We are part of a global network of food production, and I think it would be very challenging to put in targets for the UK. Having said that, I do think we need a thriving farm community. We need to be able to produce food, and we need the right conditions with farmers incentivised to farm in the right way for nature. I'm completely behind the rooftop. Absolutely. Yes, of course we should. We do it. Other people can do it. I think it would be amazing if you were incentivised to do it even more. I do think, while I absolutely loathe those acres and acres and acres of solar panels, I get it. I do also think we have to face into some really tough choices. If we want to have, secure energy into the future, something has to give. So it's place by place, and I think you have to make sensible choices, but choices will have to be made.
So we do have targets on food production. So there's a big piece around food security as part of our national security, just as water management is also part of our national security. And surely the war in Ukraine has taught us anything. It's taught us the cost of food and the inputs into food. Everything is affected if we've not got control. And we could say the same, couldn't we, about energy production? When we get to 100% UK production, we've got security again. It was in our manifesto as a commitment, and we've heard it since from DEFRA multiple times when I've had those negotiations on behalf of our rural group with the Minister. I know the target's a very long way away, so forgive me for quoting it, but it's the 50 by 50, which is the idea that 50% of food produced through national procurement should come from not just national farmers, but local farmers. So what do we mean? We mean every meal that's produced in hospitals, in prisons, in armies. So what we're trying to do is sweat the national pound, the kind of public purse. So we've got, taxpayers' money is having to pay for this particular food. So let's stop importing cheap stuff from America and let's use those contracts to guarantee long-term certainty for our own farmers by making it as local as possible to each of those stakeholders. I mean, you're probably aware, right, that your local council and your local hospital are some of the biggest contractors, the biggest procure first tier in your area. And that's already being paid from our tax. So we're trying to reuse that money by securing it for our local farmers. So it's quite a positive idea, but I'm sorry to say that it's 50 by 50, so by 2050. So we'll all be ancient. But once you've got the target, it starts to move that procurement. And as much as I did not enjoy as leaving the EU, one side effect of that is that we can shape that procurement with more of a local social value weighting within those procurement contracts. And then just on the solar panels, so the idea about effectively retrofitting, so retrofitting whether it's solar panels or other energy saving materials to homes. There was quite a group of us in Parliament in the Labour team. We're called the Coalition for Living Standards. So it was 100 or so of us want to get to delivery, want to reduce cost of living. And one of the things that we're all behind is the idea of not charging VAT on materials for retrofit or insulation, so that energy saving piece. So it's back to how do we take the policy idea and turn it into incentives on the ground. So I'm not a minister, I can't tell you it's happening, but I can tell you that more than 100 of us are working, lobbying, pushing, asking for that. And there is quite a lot of support for it.
That's good.
Thanks, Julia. Jane?
Thank you. Yes, solar on the rooftops is no brainer. I recognise we're out of time, so I also wanted to just some of the work that's been going on with onshore projects, onshore wind projects, is about habitat restoration in peatland and actually marine restoration as well. So actually, there's an awful lot of work going on at the moment in restoring back to a place that was better when it was found. And the other one I just wanted to touch on was the skills point, because actually we do a lot of work probably in the coastal areas and we work across with different universities, and I'm in a city, London as well, so I'm actually going to take your point away, because we don't really do much around renewable power, because actually some of that stuff doesn't really happen when you think about obviously the rooftop stuff, and there's some wind as well, but it doesn't happen in the inner cities. So I'm going to take that away and have a bit more of a think about that, whether we can kind of work maybe with something or do something or provide information or something. Do you? Okay.
Gavin, final message from you.
Food security is not the same as food self-sufficiency, and food security isn't the same as food resilience. I think there's an awful lot of work that we have to do on educating people about storage of food, about waste of food, especially in the home. I don't think we're going to change national diets particularly, so the idea of producing a UK avocado doesn't strike me as being particularly sensible use of water or energy particularly. So I think there has to be some sense there. We are self-sufficient in some forms of meat cuts, but we don't eat offal in this country. That's just how that's just human behaviour, human preferences. So I think we have to be sensible about the food security issue. But I do think, and that's why I'm not that pro targets. But I do think that we need to have a regular conversation about how much food we produce in this country, and I think that we need to be able to have a profitable and thriving food sector. I think on the rooftop solar, it's a no-brainer, but I would add, I think every new build should have water storage as well. We are going to run out of water in this country, in the southeast of England, very, very soon for housing. And I love the idea of the housing targets, but unless you have water security, you have nothing.
Yeah, well said.
Great, good point to end on, Gavin. Thanks to everybody for coming and for all the great speakers. Just a quick reminder that we've got lots more events to come, and if you're inspired to join SERA, there's also a leaflet, and even if you just want to share your email, that'd be great to have your support and engagement. Thanks, everyone.